This is Astrid Young, and you're listening to the Nothing Shocking podcast.
Want to know what's going on in the world of music? Then tune in to the Nothing Shocking podcast, a non-genre based, all ages friendly rock and roll program. Join us weekly for interviews with all your favorite rock stars from the mainstream to the underground. You can find us at nothingshocking.libsyn.com or anywhere you download podcasts.
We're putting the band back together.
The numbers all go to 11.
I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. What about Sabbath? AC/DC. Motorhead.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I get up off the ground and raise my head. Days like this, think I should be dead. One for Satan, two for me. Let's cheat the devil, it's fun, don't you agree?
Welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'm your co-host, Jeff Untied, and with me in Dog Bowl Studios is
Coach Nez.
You can find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Libsyn or any podcatchers. Like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter at NoShockPod.
You can also find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Rock Rage Radio every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. Our sponsor is Ragged Records, located in downtown Rock Island, Illinois, and downtown Davenport, Iowa. We'd like to thank the Hong Kong Sleepover for allowing us to use their music for our intro and bumper ending. And tonight's guest is
Astrid Young.
Yeah, she's promoting her upcoming new music this August, where she was working with Hall of Fame producer Eddie Kramer. And it was a phenomenal interview, so let's get to it.
All right, good night.
Good night. Astrid, welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'd like to introduce to you my co-host, Jeff Untied.
Astrid, thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for the correspondence. Thanks you for your willingness to participate. We're so excited to have you tonight, so let's get right into this. You are currently preparing to release new music this August. Can you give our listeners an insight to the creative process to this new endeavor?
Oh, okay. So, well, I have a new single coming out on August 4th. It's called Lay Me Down. And the project actually started as an extension of my last record, One Night at Giant Rock, because we had always intended to do a vinyl version of that record, but never quite got around to it right away. Of course, it's 10 years later now. So the problem was, in the interim, I found out that the original record, was about 3 minutes too long to do a single vinyl, so we decided to go double and record a bunch of new songs.
Nice.
And subsequently, I became acquainted with Eddie Kramer, who is kind of... He's made all my favorite records, so it's pretty exciting for me to all the Hendrix records, 5 Led Zeppelin records, a couple of Rolling Stones records, worked with the Beatles. I mean, he recorded a couple of their hits, and Bad Company, Kiss, the list goes on. He's just the guy's like walking music history. Anyway, we became acquainted, and I asked him if he would be interested in working on this record with me, and he was... He had already become a fan of my music, and he was very excited to dive into it. So we were talking about songs that we were going to record, and this is one, the single is one that I actually wrote it a long time ago, and it never really had a place on any of my records. But it's a good song, and so I kind of just tossed it in the hat, and I said, well, I got this song, and I like the piano on it. The piano's great, but everything else can go, just redo the bass and drums, I'll recut the vocal, whatever, and he listened to it and he just went nuts. And he said, you kidding? This is a hit song. He says, you don't have to redo your vocals. It's perfect. He says, I agree with you on all the other stuff. So let's do that. So we just dove right in and replaced the bass and drums initially, and then about a week later we did a string session. And to give you an idea of how this all came together, I gave him the tracks. He did a little edit, worked on it a little bit. We talked about what we wanted to do, and he says, we need a string arranger, and I said, well, I know a guy. So I hooked him up with a guy named Darcy Hepner, who's Hamilton cat up here in Canada, and quite well known as a jazz musician, actually, but he does string arrangements as well. So I hooked him up with Eddie. They came up with a plan. Darcy wrote the arrangement in like a week. And so we were scheduling that session, and Darcy's problem was that he was going to be on vacation, so we had to do it quite quickly. So I'm sitting in Eddie's kitchen, I think maybe on the Friday night, and he said, the only day that Darcy can do this is next Thursday. And I've got a studio for that night. It's the only day that he can get the musicians that he wants, et cetera, et cetera. So the complication with that was that we had to get the bass and drums done before we went into the studio. So we had to scramble and find a studio over the weekend so we could cut the bass and drums so they could do, whatever edits that they needed to do on the track to get it ready for the strings. So about a week later, we actually had a finished track, and we were in the mastering studio with it. So boom, it's done, and actually the rest of the recording for this record doesn't even start happening until August 1st, when my collaborators and the guy that co-produced the record with me in the first place, a guy named Victor DiLorenzo, who's the original drummer from the Violent Femmes.
Yeah.
And Victor and I have worked together for quite some time, and he and I did a really great job on the last record. So he's coming up to work on it. And then he also works with a guy named David J., who you might know from Bauhaus and Love and Rockets. And he and Victor play in a band called Night Crickets. And so Victor was telling him about the project and how he was coming up to work with me and Eddie Kramer, and played him the older songs. And David was really turned on by the music, and he said, do you think she'd want me to play bass on the record? And it's like, let me think about that.
Yeah.
It's the classic picture of like, I just put the phone on mute and screamed, right? It's like, oh my God. And I think the first time I talked to him on the phone, I was like a babbling schoolgirl. I couldn't believe it. So this is kind of like, in a lot of ways, this is like my rock and roll fantasy coming true. I'm getting to work with these amazing people who I have so much respect for, and who have informed my work for so many years in every way possible. And they're coming up here to work with me, and that's just glorious.
It's so exciting. I wanted to bring this back to Eddie Kramer, though. Over the years, as the artist, you've worked with other producers. Can you kind of compare and contrast working with Eddie opposed to working with other producers?
Well, that's an interesting question, because as a side musician, I've worked with a lot of producers, and actually I've worked in studios before. So I was a second engineer, and I've worked with studios on that, or producers on that level. But the interesting thing is I've never really worked with producers on my own music until I worked with Victor on One Night at Giant Rock. And I don't know why that is. I just, I've kind of had a bit of a death grip on my own music for a really long time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I have pretty profound hearing loss. And I've been wearing hearing aids since probably about 2001 or something like that. But the offshoot of that, it's very unfortunate all the way around. But when I get in the studio now, I can't tell sometimes what notes are, and I can't hear certain frequencies. So it really prevented me from doing a lot of studio work. So it was important to me to find somebody whose ears that I trusted that could help me kind of realize my musical vision. So when I did One Night at Giant Rock and worked with Victor, that's the first time I've actually really let go and let somebody produce me. And let me tell you something, it was it was a real eye-opener. It was very freeing, and he got me to go to places creatively that I never would have done on my own. And ever since then, it's been like, you know, I'm just really willing to kind of give it up to people. And you look at somebody like Eddie, who is,
yeah.
You know, what can you say about Eddie Kramer? You know, I mean, he's incredibly meticulous. I mean, the body of work itself is just speaks for itself. But when you get in the studio with this guy, he's so meticulous, and his ears are so precise. Like, he can hear things like that you wouldn't believe. And for somebody who has had such a long career and has produced so many metal bands, actually, when you think about it, you know, Whitesnake and you know, the list goes on there. So the fact that he's got ears like that at this stage of his life is pretty incredible in itself. But it's, for me, just to sit back and like watch him work on my stuff is just really gives me a very warm, fuzzy, and gleeful feeling, you know?
Oh, very good.
I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about Drag Race Face. That's a song off of One Night at Giant Rock. That's probably my favorite track. It's got a cool bass line in there.
Thank you.
And a little bit of screaming, you know, a little rock sound from you. Can you talk a little bit about that track?
Well, actually, I wrote that. I was in a band called Ist about a little over 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It's a stoner rock power trio with Dave Kiner playing guitar and a guy named Dan Cornelius on drums and myself on bass and vocals. And so Drag Race Face is something that we came up with at the time, and there's actually a version of it on the Ist record. And it's kind of a little bit more, you'll understand the name a little bit more when you hear that, because it's almost like, I'm not going to say speed metal, but it's really fast and it's really heavy, and there's a lot of screaming in it. So when we did the version for One Night at Giant Rock, because I do a couple of different arrangements of it, and it's just something that we jammed out in the studio, and it came out really cool. And yeah, I like to say it's the only real love song I've ever written.
Oh, very good. I wanted to bring this back to the band that you're working with now. You touched upon with Victor and David, but it's truly a second-to-none band. Can you talk a little bit more and tell our listeners about who else you've employed for this new music?
Oh, okay. Well, the main guitar player on the project is the guy named Tim Welsh, who is a Canadian guy, and he played in a lot of bands that were really big in Canada in the 80s, National Velvet being one of them. And he also plays in a band called Images in Vogue, which were they were very popular during the whole new wave, movement, I guess, in the early 80s there. And he also plays with Carol Pope, who is the leader of the band Rough Trade. He's actually touring with Carol right now, and he plays with tons of other people. He's just a wonderful guy, and I've known him for 45 years or something like that. When I first got together with my band Ist, we made a little movie, and Tim actually played the guitar player in the movie, because my real guitar player couldn't act. So, but anyway, I've known Tim for that long, and he was like my first call guy. However, the other people that played on the record, on the original record, a guy named Eric McFadden, who's a tremendous guitar player. He plays with George Clinton from P-Funk and many, many other people. He's an incredible player from the Bay Area, San Francisco. And also from San Francisco, a guy named Joe Gore, who has played with Tom Waits and PJ Harvey and multitudes of other people. And who else is on the record? Let's see. Jane Weedland from the Go-Go's.
Oh, wow.
Sings some backup on it, played a little guitar on it. Yeah, so... I mean, we pull in, I have a lot of people that I would like to pull in on the record, but, you know, I'm not the only decision maker, so we'll just kind of see how it plays out, really.
Oh, exciting. Very cool.
From One Night at Giant Rock, another song I wanted to ask you about, The Nerve. That one gave me a Quentin Tarantino movie vibe. Like, that should be a soundtrack, theme song.
Yeah, that's, you know, it's interesting because The Nerve is the only song on the record that my husband's a drummer too. His name's Ray Perugia, and he's really well known up here in Canada for playing in a band called Junk House and Lee Harvey Osmond. And so when we first met, actually, it was when I was starting to work on this record, and he came in and cut a few tracks, and The Nerve was one of them. And it's the only one of his tracks that he played on that made it to the record. But, subsequently we've done a lot of playing together. And when we toured this record in 2014 and Victor came up and we did a bunch of shows across Canada, Ray actually played on a few shows, so we actually had two drummers, and that's kind of what we intend to do on some of these sessions too.
Nice.
Just for kicks.
Very cool. I wanted to go fast forward back to the new music here. This new music is completely crowdfunded. We spoke to a few artists in the past that have done the crowdfunding thing, and they've been very pleased with the outcome of it all. Can you give our listeners a little retrospective of your involvement in crowdfunding, and are you happy with how the crowdfunding has gone for the new music?
Well, I think that, being that I'm the only one pushing this, I don't really have a management team or a marketing team or anything like that. I think it probably could have done better, but my like on the crowdfunding platform itself, I've raised quite a bit of money off the platform. So I just kind of put it out there every way possible. And, basically the bottom line is that record companies these days, they don't want to pay to make records. They want you to bring them a finished product. And what they will pay for, is fairly minuscule compared to, what they would commit to in the past. So, it's a matter for me. I just want to make records my way. I'm very kind of meticulous about how I do that. So we were all, when I talked to the guys about it and Eddie, we were kind of all on the same page that let's just forge ahead with this and fund it however we can. So I think that these days it's really, if you want to do something like that, you can't depend on the music industry to support you. And B, you have to think creatively about how you're going to fund it. Now we have a pretty detailed digital strategy about how we're going to promote it afterwards, and I think that it will. I think that it'll do quite well in the areas that we're promoting it. But the interesting thing is I'm in the wine business too, right? Yeah. So, and quite well known as a wine director, sommelier, and a wine writer, and I do public speaking and things like that. So I'm actually leveraging some of that cachet that I have in the wine business to raise the money. And to be honest, most of the money that I've raised has been from the wine business, from either wineries or from people that I know in the wine business. And that's really telling too.
Very much so.
To me, it's interesting. And so, I would encourage musicians, if they're frustrated about doing things like that, to think about, what marketable skills that they have, and, anything's possible, really, with a little imagination. And,
absolutely.
Of course, I'm determined. Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to take this back to Lay Me Down. When I first listened to it, it almost gave me that Beatle-esque organic vibe to it. Can you talk a little bit more?
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit more about the creation of that song, and were the Beatles I guess maybe an influence on you when you wrote that song?
Well, not really. When I wrote it, because I wrote it in, I'm going to say 1995, 96, something like that. And that's when I actually recorded the piano, and we went into a studio and cut, the piano and the organ, and actually it was a full band at the time. But writing the song itself, it was, I was playing a lot of piano back then, and I still do now, actually, to be honest. But it was about a particular moment in time. And it really meant something to me, like it was really from the heart. It was about a friend of mine, and so it has always been a very emotional song. But as I said, recording it, it's just like, wow, the piano sounds great, but I need to work on it some more. And then I would work on it a little bit more, and then I would never really have a place for it, like on any of my records. So, you know, it's amazing to think that something that started, you know, almost 30 years ago, 25 years ago, you know, is now just now making its entrance into the world.
Nice.
So to me, it just goes to show that a good song is a good song, and it's really, music is timeless, you know. It doesn't sound like it's dated or anything like that, and that's what I love about it. But, you know, I didn't initially envision the arrangement the way it is now. As a matter of fact, like I wasn't really sure how I wanted the bigger picture to turn out. And it's kind of unusual for me because usually it starts with the music, and then I write the lyrics and the melody. And I always have this idea in my head of the soundscape and what I'm trying to, you know, accomplish sonically. And this one just kind of held on its own just as a piano song for a really, really long time. So, I think the way we fleshed it out right now is a lot to do with Eddie's input, especially with the strings, because I wouldn't have initially, I mean, not that the strings absolutely belong there, but it's having worked with string sections in the past before, you know, the immediate thing they think about is just like, oh, that's going to be really expensive. So it wasn't the first thing that I talked about, but, you know, honestly, I find myself sitting there at the table with Eddie, and he comes up with these ideas, and I go, yeah, let's do that, you know, because holy crap, it's Eddie Kramer, you know. So anyways, it was really Eddie driving that whole thing, and he worked very closely with the arranger. I mean, Darcy came up with a great arrangement, but then when we did the session in the studio, and the section was running through it, I mean, it sounded great without the track, but as soon as the track kicked in, you know, it was pretty obvious that there were some parts that didn't quite fit or there were too much. And there was no hesitation at all. Eddie goes, no, it's not going to work. And he got Darcy back in the control room, and they made some adjustments to the arrangement, and they sent him back out there. And, you know, 3 hours later, we walked out with this beautiful piece of work. And it's interesting that you bring up the Beatles too, because I have a little video of the session, and I sent it to a friend of mine in the UK who's also a musician, and he said, wow, I just feel like I dropped in on a secret Beatles session or something. So if Darcy was going for that, I mean, obviously he succeeded.
Absolutely.
You know, I always think it's you know, kind of inspiring, you know, to hear your story about, like you said, you know, you kind of lost some hearing and you're trying to rework, you know, trying to maybe relearn how to sing. And you know, we talked to a guitarist once. I think they were in a car accident and they had to completely redo how they played guitar. And so that can be inspiring to those out there that maybe are in the same situation. Can you talk a little bit about, like, you know, because it'd be easy to just give up on music and stop, but maybe that where the inspiration's coming from to, you know, to keep going, to keep making music.
Yeah.
Well, I think that most musicians can agree that this is just who you are. I mean, you can't stop doing it. It's not the only challenge that I've had to my livelihood as a musician. And, you know, to be honest, it changed a lot of things that I do. And not necessarily for the better, because playing live is a bit of a challenge now. I mean, They have in-ear headphones that you can use, but they're not appropriate for all gigs. I mean, certainly for big stages, they work really well, but not for smaller clubs. And, you know, most small places that you play, they don't have like a monitor section in their board or anything like that. So that's kind of useless. You know, my advice to musicians out there is that there are, and by the way, I need to interject, you know, the years that I played in metal bands, this has nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing. This happened when I was on the road with my brother in 1993, and we were touring with Booker T and the MGs, and I spent about 6 or 7 months with Steve Cropper's guitar amp pointed at my head and basically asking them to move this amp every single night, and it didn't get moved for, you know, 6 or 7 months, and by then the damage was done. So And I didn't start wearing in-ear headphones until 98, 99, something like that. But, there's really no going back, like once it's that damaged. And so I couldn't really work in the studio. Sessions were difficult because, you have to be really on it when you're working with other people, obviously. And then, playing live, sometimes, I'll be in sound check and it sounds great. And then as soon as the band kicks in, I hear nothing. And it's just really, really challenging. So I have to pick and choose my gigs very carefully these days just to make sure that I'm comfortable, because God knows life is too short, and if it's not fun, why bother doing it, right? So, so that was a big change, not doing as many sessions, not doing as many live shows, and not being able to trust myself in the studio. But, if you're a musician at heart, like I am, music is my first love. I've been playing since, probably since I was a toddler. I've been playing something. And started playing professionally when I was 12. So it's not like you can just hang it up and go, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go do something else now, which fortunately I do other things. But, there's always a way. But if I can, offer one piece of advice besides protecting your ears, is that the more that you learn how to do things for yourself, the easier it is to explain to people or converse with people who you need to do these things for you. Like if you know how to explain things properly and you know exactly what you want, it's easier to find the people that can do it for you. And so I, would highly recommend that especially young musicians get as much experience as they can in the studio and playing with other people and things like that, just so if anything catastrophic happens, at least they can say, okay, I'm missing this part. I need somebody to fill this in. And, and then it's a little bit easier like that. So I don't know what else to say. I mean, it doesn't stop me from writing or playing. But it does, it certainly did change my trajectory quite a bit. I had to stop touring and doing a lot of things because of it.
Well, it's truly inspirational to listen to you talk about this. But some of our listeners might not realize, you've touched on it just a little bit beforehand, that your involvement in the wine business and you're a wine director. So kind of give us the whole background of your involvement in getting into the wine business.
Well, I wouldn't have a wine career if I didn't have a music career. That's 100%. I lived in California for a long time, and of course, as a musician, you ended up working in restaurants, and I was a bartender, straight out of high school. It was the easiest way to make money, and it's a fairly transient job. So I could tour part of the year, and then I could go get a job, pick up a job somewhere as a bartender. And I thought I knew a little bit about wine. But around about, early 90s, I'd say I was working for an orchestra contractor in Los Angeles and trying to get into film music. And we were on a session one day, and everybody went for lunch, and we're sitting around talking about how much we hate dealing with the suits at studios. And this one guy said, well, all you need to do if you want to have something in common with them is play golf or know something about wine. And, that kind of, the light bulb went off over my head, and I went, well, not much of a golfer, so I'm going to go the other way. And the next day I went down and to the newsstand and bought a Wine Spectator magazine and read it from cover to cover, and had a very interesting realization that even though I thought I knew a little bit about wine, I realized I knew nothing about wine. And so that kind of, it sparked a real curiosity in me. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. And it kind of snowballed from there. And I got my first sommelier certification in 1997. And I was still touring at the time, too. I was a candidate for Master of Wine at the time, during the time I was touring. And why I say that if I didn't have a music career, I wouldn't have a wine career, is that I got to tour. I got to visit a lot of places around the world, a lot of wine growing regions, because I was traveling basically on somebody else's dime, So if we have a couple of days off, and in Rome, I could drive up to Tuscany, or, a couple of days off in Paris. You could go to Champagne or Burgundy, so all of these places, I've been all of these places and I have relationships with all these people. And then, of course, people in the wine business really, really love wine, so some of my first gigs were, going to dinner with record executives and really high up people in the music industry, just strictly to choose the wine for them at dinner. And it's a pretty cool job, actually. And so I got a little bit of a taste of what it was like to spend other people's money on wine. And it's actually quite addictive. And so I lived in Napa Valley for a while. I was a wine buyer for a wine shop and a couple of different restaurants. And then when I came back to Canada, I got another sommelier certification and worked at several restaurants up here. And I've won a ton of awards. And since I've been here for the past 20 years, I've kind of become an expert in it's a wine region up here called Prince Edward County in Ontario. And so I've kind of been here since the beginning. Like when I moved here, there was 4 wineries and now there's 50. Wow. And I know them all like deeply and often get hired to do public speaking and things like that. And so it's been quite a journey, and I certainly couldn't have predicted where it would take me, but music is still number one for me. Yeah. It was like the wine thing was kind of like it was a surprise, but it's a lot of fun, and I love nothing more than talking about wine. Even though I'm going to have to be honest, I don't really drink that much anymore, but but I've tasted plenty, and I still taste. I mean, I'm a wine judge, and I'm still very, very involved in the industry. So yeah, it's a really cool thing, and to be honest, it's really facilitated a lot of things in my life and career, because if I didn't have to take music gigs that I didn't want to take, simply because I had other things that I could do for money. And, you see a lot of musicians and jobbers and side musicians and session musicians that always complain about it. It's just like, I love what I do, but I don't necessarily like the people that I'm doing it for, or the music that I'm making. And, I just never wanted to put myself in that position. So I consider myself very, very lucky.
Oh, fantastic. All right. So you're not only a recording artist and a wine connoisseur, but you're also an author.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about your work as an author. Maybe some of our listeners might not realize that you're an author. Tell us more. Talk a little bit more about it.
Well, if they're interested, I actually have a book called Being Young. You can order off my website, and there's another site on the web. You might find it on Amazon, but it's out of print from my publisher. Went out of business a couple of years ago, so the rights reverted back to me. So we're just kind of in transition right now, trying to find a new publisher. But the writing side of things, my father was a writer. He wrote about 45 books. And so I kind of grew up in that world. It was very kind of normal to me. He was a newspaper man. He's won tons of awards. He's had many bestsellers in Canada. And, when I was growing up, he was a household name, both as a writer and as a broadcast journalist. So I come by it honestly, I have to say. And, I make my living writing right now too, which is another thing, that's just freelancing and stuff like that. But the book kind of came out of, I always get asked the question, what's it like being Neil Young's sister, or, growing up in that family and stuff like that. And I just never know how to answer that, because, sometimes I just look at them and go, well, I don't know. Do you have a sister or brother? What's that like? Families are families, right?
Yeah.
And so I got asked that question often enough that I thought, well, maybe I should write a book, and see if I can answer that question for myself. And my father had written a book called Neil and Me, and which was quite well received, but it kind of stopped, where the timeline stopped was right around 1985, 1984, 1985, something like that. So my book kind of picked up where he left off, and it's not about my brother, and it's not about my father. It's about me. It's my story, and there's a lot of my dad and my brother in it, but it's from my perspective, and I am very introspective about why we are the way we are. You know, the book's called Being Young, and so, you know, my dad's influence, my brother's influence, and obviously all the years that I worked with Neil really play into many of the stories that I tell. And so I have a new edition of that book that I'm working on right now, and both my brothers, Neil and Bob, are collaborating with me on it. So I think it's going to be even more interesting, and there'll be a lot of kind of like reading between the lines because, you know, at this stage of my life, I'm more interested in telling the truth than I am anything else. So, so it should be interesting. So that's one of my writing projects. As soon as we get done with this record, I think that's probably what I'll dive into.
Oh, fantastic!
I think it was on Father's Day on Facebook or something. You had a picture of your dad on a snowmobile for a Ski Whiz commercial.
Oh yeah,
Can you talk about that? That was cool.
Well, he was, like I said, he was quite a household name in Canada, and you can kind of search the CBC, which is, you know, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. They have a lot of really cool old videos of him, like interviewing George Chivallo and, you know, other big sports figures. And he was known for a long time as the only hockey writer in Canada. But he was known for his hockey stuff, and he used to do the player interviews in between periods on Hockey Night in Canada. So he was on TV all the time. He had a TV show called The Hot Stove Lounge that took place in Maple Leaf Gardens after the games. And so he was known as a hockey guy, but he is also he was also very well respected in pretty much every other sport. I mean, he's got books that he's written on football and baseball and all kinds of stuff. You know, he actually holds the 2 highest awards in thoroughbred horse racing, also for articles that he's written on jockeys. Oh, wow. On a jockey named Lafitte Pingré, actually. So he won the Eclipse Award, which is a really prestigious award in thoroughbred horse racing. And he also won the Sovereign Award, which is the equivalent of the Eclipse Award in Canada. So, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, he was a bit of an overachiever. So.
Wow. All right. So we have one last question to ask you, and then we'll leave you alone for the evening.
Sure.
So I asked this to all of our guests, and we'll ask you too. So the mystery of rock and roll is no longer a thing anymore with the dawning of the internet and all the different social medias that are out there. But for you, the artist and the fan, what do you prefer, this new age of accessibility? And because if we didn't have the internet, we wouldn't be doing this with you right now. Or do you miss that mystique and mystery of rock and roll?
Well, you know, it's a double-edged sword because it's easier to be an independent musician and it's easier to get your music to people. I mean, I remember when MySpace first came out and it was like, wow, I can put my music online and people don't have to like create an account. I can just like send them a link and they can listen to it. And that was just like so incredible. But, you know, where it's gotten to now, which is really unfortunate, is that streaming and YouTube and the accessibility of music online has really devalued music overall. So, kids today, and I sound really old when I say that, but, you know, I'm talking about, you know, teenagers and 20-somethings. I mean, they're used to getting their music and consuming their music in very small sound bites. So they're going to TikTok and listening to 30 seconds of a song at a time, and that's it, right? So it's changed the way that we write songs, which is interesting because, you know, you go back to the 70s, in even the 80s and before, you know, you'd have, with rock music anyway, you have these long kind of dramatic introductions into the songs, you know, before any vocals came in. But now you got to hit them right away with some kind of hook some way to hook them in, or else they're just going to click over to the next song, right? Yeah. So it's changed a lot of things, and I don't think it's necessarily for the better. However, this is where we're at right now, and I just, it's really sad for most of the musicians and people who have like these massive bodies of work, like my brother, like Bob Dylan, or like you just name any band that has been doing this, for 40 some years. And the fact that the only way that they can make money right now is by touring, because the songs are worth nothing,
Yeah.
And that's really sad, because it's not cheap to make this stuff. And it's a part of your soul, and all of a sudden it's being devalued that much that, it's just like the expectation is that you're going to give it away for free.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to do that to a certain point. You can't hold it too close to your chest or nobody's going to hear it, right? Mm-hmm. Unless you're somebody that has that kind of audience that is just going to come to you for it. But I mean, there's not very many people that can do that, right? So I just, I had this conversation with my brother a couple of years ago about, he was saying that he didn't know how kids could justify choosing music as a career anymore. And that is really sad. And you look at music in the schools, music programs are disappearing. And except for, if it wasn't for the efforts of like some very, very dedicated music teachers, and, a handful of kids that really, really want to do this. I mean, everybody wants to do it, but they want the end result, right? The process is being lost. And I think that's really sad. And not just because I'm a process person. I mean, I'm an artist, whether I'm writing or making music or doing visual art or anything like that. It's really, art exists in the moment that you're creating it, And you can't really look at the end result because you don't know what that's going to be. And I think this is what is lost, by all the music being online and everything being digitized. And, there's no solution to it, unfortunately. There's no going back. So I just hope that it corrects itself somewhere along the way, and that people start valuing musical art the way it should be valued and the way it always has been. I mean, the rock stars and the soundtrack of our youth are, they're still there, but nobody's making those records anymore. Mm-mm. Record companies are not producing rock stars anymore. So when this generation that we hold so close, when they're gone, that's it, what's next? I mean, most of what's out there has just such a short shelf life that I think it's quite sad. You got a handful of artists that will endure, but it's not the same, No,
it's not. Yeah. And I got to tell you, that was the most poignant answer to that question I've ever heard. That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Don't get me started.
It was fantastic. So we're out of our allotted time for the evening. Is there anything else that you would like to plug or promote that we did not cover tonight?
No, just, keep an eye out for the record and for the single, Lay Me Down. And if anybody would like to pre-order the record, the pre-sale's on right now on my website, astridyoung.net. And there's all kinds of other cool stuff there. You can order a signed book, and keep up with shows that I have coming up and the various things that I do. So I would encourage everybody to reach out and connect in some level, because, that's what it's all about, is connection, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, this is how things are going to work out. Mm-hmm. We're about 3 weeks behind on our episodes, but once we're caught up here, Jeff, the editing wizard over here, we'll get this all cleaned up, and I'll send it to you immediately. Please share it wherever you can. We will share it on all of our social medias. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
And I will do the same. Thank you very much, guys.
So,
all right.
Before we let you go for the evening, I want to let you know that I had no idea of your hearing loss issue, and it was so inspiring to listen to you talk about it, because my wife is legally blind, and she's 60% deaf. And it's just...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's amazing to listen to perseverance, what you've gone through and how you overcame it. So very, very inspirational.
Yes. I think that, at the bottom line is that, we identify ourselves with, you know, our appearance, our senses, you know, parts of ourself that aren't necessarily, like, I am still who I am. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a realization that I had to come to myself. I mean, I identified with, you know, music and my voice. I had thyroid cancer and had 2 operations on my throat, and they told me I could lose my voice. And that was a real freak out because, you know, I thought, well, if I lose my voice, then where am I now? But I had to really get my head around that and say, you know what, I'll be okay. I do other things. I still enjoy life. I'm still alive. And, you know, it doesn't change who I am as a person, you know, and I think that, you know, some people may allow it to do that, you know, and become bitter, but life's too short, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was an absolute honor to have you on tonight. Jeff and I were both just absolutely excited to have you. So thank you so much. And I'll be in touch with you in about 3 weeks. Sound good?
Sounds great.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Okay, you too. Bye.